Now starting, all attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, my name is Drew Sukup. On behalf of VMUG, I'd like to welcome you to today's Expedient webcast, Expedient's Push Button DR, the fastest VMware disaster recovery in the business, presented by AJ Kuftik, Principal Technologist at Expedient. Thank you for participating in today's webcast and for your continued support in the Global VMUG program. Before we begin, I have three quick housekeeping items to go over. First, today's webcast will be recorded and available for you on demand. You will receive an email with the on-demand link, so keep an eye out for that. Second, a Q&A session will follow today's presentation. All questions will need to be entered in the question window near the bottom of your GoToWebinar screen. And do not be worried about sending too many questions. We love getting questions. Third, there will be a short online evaluation that pops up as you exit the webcast. Please take a minute and let us know what you thought of today's session and what you might like to see going forward. All attendees from today's webcast who opted in at registration will be entered into a raffle to win a $100 Amazon gift card. The winners will be contacted directly by Expedient, so good luck. All right, let's get started. AJ, I'll turn it over to you now.
Thanks, Drew. Good afternoon, good morning, everybody, depending on your time zone. My name is AJ Kuftik. I am Principal Technologist with Expedient. I want to thank you for joining us today. As Drew mentioned, please enter those questions into the Q&A panel. Fill it up. I would love to answer nothing but questions for like 15 minutes at the end here, but just please make sure you put them in the Q&A panel. For those of you who are new to Expedient, we were founded in 2001. We started as a co-location company, moved into managed services, and are now in cloud. We have cloud locations US East, Central, and West. Our West region is actually just a bit under a year old now in Phoenix, Arizona. And we have international cloud deployments on customer sites in Australia, Germany, and Canada. So if our cloud locations don't work, we can bring our cloud to you, and that applies domestically as well. We're a VMware cloud provider and have been since 2007. We have 45,000 virtual machines on our platform. So we've been running VMware solutions at scale for a very long time. We're also a Zerto Platinum partner. But when we talk about disaster recovery and we talk about how we can be the fastest recovery, we have to think about what could go wrong, right? How hard could this be? And when we think about disasters, a lot of people immediately turn their eye to things like natural disasters, right? It's very straightforward to say that this hurricane came through, this tornado came through, this earthquake happened, these floods happened, and say this is a monumental or very large impact that is unavoidable. The problem is that natural disasters aren't the most common. They're more common in certain parts of the country than others, or certain parts of the world than others. But for the most part, natural disasters are a once every few years sort of thing. More often, you would see things like power outages, right? Truck hits a pole outside your building. Maybe that's a communications outage or a power outage that happens as part of, say, a storm that rolls through. It may not be something that takes, days or weeks to recover from. It may be something that takes hours to recover from. And I think the one that we see or all have in our hearts most often are things like human errors. Things like the Greater North American Free Range Backhoe. The backhoe that goes through and digs up a fiber line or a power line or some sort of, a dump truck goes and hits an overhead line, or a truck hits a pole and catches fiber on fire. Both of those are very real stories that have happened to me. And so those sorts of, outages may not be full-blown disasters, but may lead to someone investigating or initiating their disaster recovery plan. The one that we see happening far more often now, though, are malicious attacks. And it's not just small organizations that just get, oh, hey, we goofed and something happened. Full cities are getting hit, right? City of Atlanta in 2018 got hit with a ransomware attack. The ransom was $51,000. They didn't want to pay it, and they ended up paying $9.5 million in recovery. The same thing with Baltimore, $76,000 in ransom. They didn't want to pay it, and it turned into an $18 million recovery effort. These are big sums of money coming off of a very small ransom. And if we flip that around a little bit, Lake City, Florida paid $460,000 in ransom because it was cheaper than recovering and trying to get everything back online. It was just cheaper to go do that for a couple reasons. One of them was that they didn't have good backups. And so they couldn't recover really. But they also said, hey, it would just be cheaper to pay it and get all of our things back to where they were before and faster than it would be to try and recover everything like Atlanta and Baltimore went through. And Atlanta and Baltimore had multiple systems that were offline for weeks or months. And so now, when we think about it in that instance, when we want to recover from something like a ransomware attack, we really need to understand how to make DR as quick as it can be. But really, how hard could DR be, right? How hard could building a disaster recovery solution be? How hard could it be to come up with something that could recover from a ransomware attack? Well, it's certainly not easy, right? The first question you really have to ask yourself involving anything like this is, what is the cost of downtime, right? This is the same sort of thing that we think about when we talk about, high availability solutions or making things active or implementing new technologies to try and improve resiliency. Something even like disaster recovery is, what is the actual cost of downtime? Because the cost of downtime has to be higher than the cost of building a solution to prevent that from happening, because if it's not, you're spending a lot of money and not saving anything in the end. So what is the actual cost of downtime? This one's kind of hard to pin down because sometimes it depends on day of the week, time of day. But assuming that this happened at your peak time, what is the cost of that downtime? How do I justify this? And then once you understand your costs, where do you go? Are you in a position to have 2 data centers? Do you have maybe 2 buildings that you can use? You want to make sure that when you're looking at this from a disaster standpoint, that you're not putting yourself you're not recovering into the disaster, right? So if we go to the natural disaster sort of realm, you can easily, you can't replicate across the street. You can't replicate next door and not be affected by the same thing that's affecting your production environment. But from a overall disaster standpoint, where do you go? What data center do you move into? And if you have a data center, what hardware do you need? And this is not just hardware, this also includes software and the systems themselves, right? If I just go out and buy a bunch of x86 servers and some switches and some storage and build an environment, is that the hardware that matches or is close to matching what I have in production today, right? Do I run 75% of my business off of a mainframe and I'm trying to recover all of my VMs and none of my mainframe? I'm missing the point, right? So how do I make sure that what I'm running in production is matched as closely as possible in DR so that when I fail over, I'm able to recover? But now we get into the softer costs. How much time can we actually allocate to doing this, right? We're all here, and I'm sure that if you are on a webinar talking about disaster recovery, you're spending time educating yourself. But this also plays into the rest of what we spend our time on in IT. Things like a 40+ hour work week just trying to do patching and tickets and new server builds and decom of gear and hardware refreshes and all the things that we have to do. Do you have time to allocate to, in essence, doubling some of that work for a disaster recovery site? And if you say, we don't really have time to build this, or we don't have time to actually allocate to doing this, who builds it? Do you hand it to a VAR? Do you hand it to a partner to come in and build a bunch of servers and stand up a storage array, or deploy hyperconverged infrastructure to connect everything together to make it all available? That's fine, but then who supports it going forward? Is it you? Is it this VAR? Is it somebody else on your team? How do you support that going forward? How do you make sure that when it's needed, it is available and it can be consumed? One of the other pieces here is that a lot of times when we consider disaster recovery failover, we consider just the compute and the storage, right? Where does it run and what data is it using? Where is my operating system? Where is my system? So every storage array, every computing platform, every hyperconverged platform all has some sort of replication function that you can use to get from point A to point B. The problem is, how does the networking work? How do you make sure that your external IPs, your internal IPs are there so that when you fail over, it's a clean failover and you can bring everything up and make it work immediately? Are you prepared for things like re-IPs or DNS changes or completely different systems that users may not be used to logging into? They may want to go to website.com and not know that they have to go to failover.website.com to get to the backup system, right? How do you make that work and make it as seamless as possible for your end users? And speaking of end users, who's going to test and who's going to validate that this test was successful, right? How do I go out and click? I can go out and click the button and say, hey, do a failover. And the VMs come up and they power on and I can ping all of them. And I can say, well, I did my job. Everything has failed over. Everything's great. But inside of those systems, if the database came up after the application server came up and my application's not actually running, I don't know that unless my end users or someone who maintains that application is telling me that that application is good. So do you have buy-in from your staff, from your business, to have people validate your DR testing? And these are just the questions I came up with off the top of my head in some of the finer details on some of those. But there's way more questions to this. When do you do this? What is your decision time? How do you decide whether or not to go to your disaster recovery option? And so when we think about that, what options do you have? Well, the first one is doing it yourself. And this is very much like a pickup truck with an inside door as a tailgate, right? I'm going to go out and buy new hardware for production and take my existing production hardware and put it in my DR site. And it's like 3 to maybe 4 years old. And I'm ticking the box to say, yep, I've done my disaster recovery. I have a place to go to. But that may not actually work for your end users. That may not actually work for them. They may say, oh, hey, this is really slow. Hey, this doesn't really work for me. This doesn't work. Or you're going to spend a ton of time replacing hardware that starts to fail and maintaining support contracts on super old hardware, just trying to say that you have a DR site, right? So you're taking some shortcuts to try and build something that works. Another option is hyperscale. From a hyperscale standpoint, it's like a flying car. Sure, you know how to drive a car on the road, but if you want to make it go up in the air, you have some things to learn. You have to understand how wind speed or airspeed works, right? So how do I make sure that when I'm doing this and taking on this option that my staff is trained, that I understand how this is going to work, and I understand what the caveats are around using that? What most people are actually looking for, though, is disaster recovery as a service, right? This is like a lease on a truck. I'm paying every single month. It is a consistent payment. I know that this vehicle is protected, right? I still have the warranty because it's always a brand new vehicle. I know that it's likely not going to break on me. And I know that I can keep up with the latest in technology. When I'm done with the lease on this, I can renew my lease on a new vehicle and keep that moving. So I'm able to constantly keep up and not have to worry about running on 3 to 5 year old hardware just to say that I have a disaster recovery plan. And so when we look at DR as a service, let's take a look at how Expedient actually compares with, say, a hyperscale platform. With Expedient, we have a full network failover. That network failover includes firewalls, IP ranges, VPN tunnels, and egress points. So we're able to fail everything over exactly as it is in production today. So when your users log in, they go to website.com or they VPN into remote.website.com, and they're able to get to their applications without any issue, right? It's the exact same way they did before. It looks like, hey, the servers were down for a bit, but we're back up and running now. With a hyperscaler, those are manual DNS changes. Those are manual network changes. And as anybody here who's had to deal with DNS propagation, that can take some time and may involve some end user computing support to try and make sure that everything gets flushed out properly, right? Things like, hey, it's the DNS haiku. It's not DNS. It was never DNS. It was totally DNS, right? Put that one in your heart. But DNS changes can take a very, very long time. With Expedient's DR as a service, we have easy failback. We're VMware on both sides, right? You're a VMware on your site, you're a VMware in our environment. You're failing over to a VMware platform. When you want to go back to your primary location, it's just failing back. You're pointing the replication in the other direction. The data gets copied and synced, and then you do a failover, and you're done. There's no changes, there's no conversion. It runs exactly the same way that it ran before. With a hyperscaler, it's a disruptive and difficult failback, right? Especially if you go into their native platforms. You have EC2 instances, Azure Compute instances, where if you fail over into those platforms, you're going to have to convert in to get onto it, but also convert back out. And those egress charges can be very, very expensive. And it requires you shutting all the way down so you have a clean slate to actually do that reconversion back to your on-premises technology. With Expedient, you have a 100% SLA. That means if your service is down, you get a service credit. That's the SLA. I've just said the entire thing. With a hyperscaler, it's 2.9 plus because it depends on the service that you're using. Hyperscalers will set their SLAs per service so that they are kind of balancing out how to not pay constant service credits. We don't worry about that. We want our customers to have the best experience possible. And speaking of that experience, we guarantee performance. There is no oversubscription. When you have DR resources with us, they're your resources. We do not sell your resources 4 times over and wildly oversubscribe. We make sure that you have the performance you need and the resources when you need them. With the hyperscaler, you have various variable performance, and those resources can and will be oversubscribed, right? They will sell that gig of RAM, that gig of storage multiple times over because they don't expect everybody to come in all at once. These sorts of things can happen, right? And natural disasters, when they do happen, can affect large swaths of the population. Things like Hurricane Sandy, everybody in New York City ran to their DR sites, and they all went all at the same time. And it turns out New York City is a large city, some might say. And so all of the DR providers got swamped with requests to turn up DR resources, and it took a very, very long time to get them up and running because those resources were oversold. So how do we deliver DR as a service to our customers? We sit down with our delivery team and you as a customer to go through your runbook. And your runbook includes 2 main pieces. There's a compute portion of your runbook. That's where we sit down, and from the failover orchestration side of the house, we go through and make sure that, say, if you have an application, let's call it a traditional 3-tier app, you have a web server, an app server, and a database server. Great. Those 3 can go into a protection group together so that they are all consistent and they are all ready to go. From a networking standpoint, we make sure that your networks are available on both sides so that when you do a failover, you don't have to change any IPs, you don't have to change IP ranges, you don't have to change public IPs. We make sure that the network is available on both sides as well. And that hands-on delivery extends into testing, right? With our white glove service, we make sure that you have a successful test. We don't get paid, you don't pay us until we have a successful test. And that is, in essence, a 2-way contract. We want to make sure that you as a customer are successful, that you have a successful DR test, because if it fails and never worked in the first place, we don't want you to yell at us because it didn't work. We also want to make sure that you're successful so that when you are getting a service from us, that you're having the best experience possible. You can go back to your leadership with the completed test and say, look, we paid for the service, we have a successful test, everything was great, and we can all move forward together in that partnership. And speaking of testing, our testing is unlimited. You don't have to call us to say, hey, on March 23rd, we're going to be doing a DR test. You can just test now, or even now, right? You can do it whenever you want to. You can test things like per application. So maybe you want to do things like a test dev bring up. I want to bring up my test database. I want to bring up this database server that I have in production, bring it up inside of a bubble, inside of that environment, inside of that DR environment, and I'm going to do database schema testing because I want to make sure that this change that I'm making works in my production database server. So you can use this also for testing purposes, not just DR testing, but for your own application and DevOps type testing. The other thing is a location So we have 12 data centers across the US. You choose what data center you want to go into. So if you want to go into our Indianapolis data center because you're in Indiana, or you're in Kentucky and Indiana, the Indianapolis data center is the closest one, or maybe you're in, you're in New Hampshire and Boston's our closest data center. You can go into those data centers and utilize those as your secondary data center and stay close to where you are and keep your latency down. Or maybe you're in New Hampshire and you want to use Indianapolis because you want to be way, way far away to make sure that anything that's affecting you locally is not affecting your application's availability nationally or globally. So when we talk about that network failover, that's kind of our little magic. That's our secret sauce. And this allows us to fail over firewalls, IP ranges, VPN tunnels, and egress points. Right? We're able to bring that over so that users don't have to jump through hoops to try and make their disaster recovery work. So let's take a look at how this actually works. We have our primary site on the left. On the bottom, we have our virtual servers. We have our network gateway IP, 192.168.1.1, and we have our public internet IP, 206.210.68.123. So those are our public, that's a public IP that this application is using. On the secondary site, we also have a core. And with Zerto, we're virtually replicating everything. So we're copying everything over, making sure that we have a constant running sync and a constant journal of changes. And we also have failover orchestration happening so that the 3-tier app all inside of one protection group, that app, database, and web server, all together, all orchestrated to fail over correctly so that you don't have things like database server coming up after the application server and then having to do the reboot dance to try and put everything together. So that public IP pushes out to the core via BGP. And if you have a no good, very bad day, the network gateway fails over, my virtual servers fail over, my public internet IP comes over, and BGP pushes it out to the core, and then that core now becomes the primary site, and the old site becomes the secondary. So my public internet users, my remote site VPN users are all coming into the same public IP. Nothing has changed. DNS doesn't change. I don't have to worry about propagation. It just works. So let's actually look at this. Let's dive into an actual demo here. And I realized that I did not open that prior to getting started. And then I struggle to find it. So that's fun. Sorry about that, everybody. There we go. Let's change the screen share to that. Great. All right. Sorry about that, everybody. So in here we have our Expedient Enterprise Cloud. I'm replicating from our ACM data center to our 701 data center. So if I go into my ACM data center, I have a pair of servers down here, VMworld Server 1 and VMworld Server 2. And if I open up my demo website here, I can pull this up and I can see that I have a regular WordPress site, nothing terribly fancy. I'm going to go into our Zerto self-service interface. This is all inside of our cloud. And I can see that I have a number of VPGs available here. And if I go into this VMworld demo ACMs to 701, I can see my RPO right now is 8 seconds, not 8 minutes, not 8 hours, 8 seconds. And if I look at my protected VMs, I see that my 2 servers are here and we're all protected. So we'll go in here, we will check some boxes, and we will click Failover. So I'm going to fail over these VPGs now, and just here to make sure I have them both available. And in here, I can change my checkpoint. So one of the really cool things is that I can go back in the journal. I can go back in time, in essence, and go back to maybe pre-failure, pre-ransomware, and bring my systems back online. This is actually something we've done for customers. In fact, we just did this recently for a customer. We were able to get them back up and running in hours, not days. So we can fail back to, say, 9:34:37 p.m. on April 29th. But in this particular instance, I'm just going to pick the latest. We're just going to go back to the last checkpoint. And we'll do the same thing here. And these commit policies are a way for us to protect ourselves against bringing up applications in DR when they're not ready. So there is, the way that Zerto works is that it actually kicks over a journal. There's a replication from the source to the destination. The destination keeps track of all of the journals. And so from our standpoint, we look at how to actually keep that journal up to date. And when you actually want to go back to something, it just reverts to that checkpoint on the destination side. And when you have the opportunity to still roll back. So if you do a failover and for whatever reason it doesn't work, you can roll back and go back to your source site and you're fine. If you're in the actual event of a disaster, you're probably just going to roll over and it's going to commit because it can't kick any changes back. For this, I'm going to keep full manual control. And go with none. But you have the option to choose commit, where it deletes the local journal and starts writing the journal to the other side. Or we can fail over and say, hey, we're done, and we're going to delete, or we're going to roll back and keep the journal on the original site. For the purposes of this demo, because there's no actual disaster, I am able to get to these VMs. I'm going to force shut them down and just make sure that they close out all the way. And we will start the failover process. So what this is doing is this is powering on a VM in my other data center that's already there. All of the data is already there. All the journal changes are already there. So I'm able to keep up with that. The other piece of this is our egress points. So we're able to fail over the egress points because of VMware's NSX platform. So I can go into our VMworld demo environment here. And I have my ACM data center where these VMs currently live, and they're failing over to 701. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to swap my egress points, and they now fail over. So I'm able to keep that going from ACM over to 701, and now these VMs are now talking out of the 701 data center instead of my ACM data center. If I go back into my Zerto environment here, the failover is ended, so everything is cut over, that VM is up and running. And if I go into my 701 data center, I can see that these two servers are online. And now I have the option to roll back or commit. And so what I'll do is I will refresh this page and I can see that it's up and running and I can scroll through it. I didn't make any changes. I'm using the exact same VMs. They moved from one data center to another, and I'm able to keep my operations moving. So what I'll do now is I will commit these, and this will delete the local journal and start a journal on my previous site. So these are being promoted, and now everything is up to date here. And you can see that it's delta syncing a volume because it's saying, hey, I'm over here now. I've made some small changes because somebody's accessed the website, so I need to sync the changes back over to the original side. So that's a failover. That was it. You saw the entire thing. It took, what, 4 minutes? It took me longer to pull the demo up than it did to actually do the failover itself. But let's fail it back, right? So let's go into the failover again. We're going to fail this back. I'm going to turn, we've already turned the replication around. We're already replicating back into the opposite direction. And it's as simple as just doing it again, right? I'm going to go in here. I'm going to see that everything is already set to the latest checkpoint. So I don't have to worry about that. We'll change our commit policy down to none. We'll force the shutdown on both VMs. And we'll actually kick this off. Now this time, I'm going to ping this environment and see that I have this environment pinging, right? So it's failing over, so it's already shut down the VMs. That is an expected outage, right? I told it to force shut it down. And when I hit refresh, the site can't be reached because those VMs have been forced shut down as part of doing a failover. So as these are failing over, here we go. So failover is now ended. I'm going to go into my data centers and see that these VMs are now powered on. So there's server 1 and server 2. And I'm going to fail my egress points back from 701 back to the ACM data center. Swap this back. And there's the failover. So we'll see that our failover is here and ready. And if I go back to my ping, I can see that my ping is now up and running. Again, no changes, no IP changes, no DNS changes. Everything is just there and running. And if I hit refresh, the website loads. So that's a demo of our failover and failback. And it took what, 5-6 minutes, something along those lines. So it's a very, very quick way for you to be able to fail over your environment. And you can do that at a per VM level. I saw a couple questions there about DR one machine or multiple machines. You can DR even down to one machine. Our push button DR gives us the capability to do a journal of changes for that ransomware protection. We've actually done this with customers and helped them recover faster than they would if they were trying to do what Atlanta and Baltimore did, which was try to recover from backups that may have been encrypted at some point. We have near real-time RPO. The RPO on those machines was 8 seconds with a 15-minute RTO. Right? We want you to be up as quickly as you possibly can be. The failover is between the same IPs. So that public IP comes over. You don't have to change it. You don't have to do any sort of goofy DNS changes to come up with or to point to the new public IP. Everything is done and everything stays the same. It should be as seamless to your end users as it possibly can be. There's also a VMware license saving model in here. If you build a DR site yourself, you're actually building whole new hosts and all new storage, and you have to license those hosts. You can't reuse licensing from production into your disaster recovery environment. And so what we're able to do here is we're able to have our DR licensing come out of our VMware Cloud Provider licensing, which is a consumption-based licensing model. You only pay for the VMware license when those VMs are powered on. So you're not paying for VMware licenses during the entire time that you're just replicating in. You're only paying for them when they actually land in our data center and they are powered on. You can also bring your own licensing if you're a Zerto customer. So Zerto thanks you for your business, and you can use that on our platform as well. So you can get a number of the additional savings on top of that. And again, these resources are yours. So you can do pretty much whatever you want to with them. You can use them for database schema changes. You could use them for test dev. You could use them for cordoning off and doing load testing. You could do any of those sorts of things inside of the DR environment because they're your resources. They're available to you all the time. And the test button and failover buttons are available to you constantly. So if you want to get your hands on this platform, please reach out to me, aj.kuftik@expedient.com, or you could go to expedient.com/vmware-test-drive, and you can sign up for a 30-day free trial. It's 128 gigs of RAM, a terabyte of storage, portal access to the environment. We can set it up with push button DR so you and our solutions architects can go through and make sure that this meets your needs. Right? We're not just, we're not the sort of cloud that's just going to hand you a bunch of services and hope you figure it out later. We're a cloud that wants you to be successful. We want you to sit down with us and figure out and make sure that this is the right solution for you. And so if you sit down or sign up with one of these, our solutions architects will reach out and actually work with you on the actual platform. And with that, I'm going to open it up for questions here. I see here. Can you DR one machine at a time, or do they have to be in clusters? No, you can DR one machine, one individual machine if you want to. We prefer to see things in sort of those protection groups. We want to make sure that things. We know that VMs aren't truly lone items, right? They're usually connected to something else. They are connected to um, an application. They're connected to another application. They're connected to um, databases. They're connected to web servers. They're connected to reporting systems. So being able to fail over a single VM is helpful for things like test dev purposes, but from um, an overall platform standpoint, it may not be the most efficient way to do disaster recovery. Does a customer have to use Zerto for the failover test, or can they use another type of product that's compatible? Um, when you use our push button DR, you are using Zerto. We have some other disaster recovery options in our platform. So we use Cohesity for our cloud data protection. So if you have maybe a tier 2, tier 3, maybe test dev workload there as well, you can back up, you can just restore or live mount those backups. The difference between Zerto and Cohesity in that specific in our particular platforms is that Zerto has the much shorter RPO. We do 4-hour snapshots on the Cohesity side. So if you're looking for something but it doesn't need to be up or have the lowest RPO possible, you can use something like our Cohesity platform or even our VMware Cloud Director Availability platform to do that. So a number of different DR options that is not just tied to Zerto, but Zerto is our premier platform for doing that. It is the fastest one that we have. Can you fail over a single workload? Yes, that's very similar to the very first question that we had there around DR one machine or have to be in clusters. You can DR those based on the actual workload themselves. So again, you can do just, I know that this is my main accounting system, and the accounting system is made up of these VMs. You can group those together, and you can even do things like, I need a full site, oh no, everything's gone very wrong failover of all of the VPGs all at once. So you can do both. You don't have to do just one or the other. Let's see here. Do you have to create the VPGs, or do we have that possibility? So this plays into. Thank you for the question that leads into a lovely segue, really. So for us, we provide co-managed services, and I put the emphasis on the co there. You have the option to create the VPGs. You have the option to maintain everything, but we maintain the platform for you. So you don't have to worry about the interoperability between Zerto 7.5 or .6 to vSphere 6.7 or 7.0, or how that interacts with NSX or how that interacts with vCloud Director. We take care of all of that for you. We are a managed DR as a service. So all of the things that I talked about in terms of like building your own DR site, licensing, host, storage, capacity, networking, all of that is handled by us. And it makes it much simpler for you. You get the peace of mind to know that it works and that you have a staff of professionals behind it to make sure that it's going to work it's going to work the right way every single time, versus trying to add this on and hope that at some point you have the capability to spend an hour or two up doing a bunch of upgrades. So from that standpoint, yes, you have you have the ability to create the VPGs. You can also have the full control over the test button. But if you're unavailable, let's say you're kindly on vacation, hopefully, you can actually call us and we can hit the DR button for you. Again, it's one of the big benefits of having a DR as a service. You have a staff. We have a 24/7 support. We don't have there is no like support model of like, oh, this is only 9 to 5 support. You get 24/7 support regardless of what size customer you are. That is part of our mission to you as our customer. We want you to be successful regardless of time of day, right? So if you have If you have a time of day where you want, like you need support, things have gone very badly at 2 in the morning, we're here to help. Is our Zerto single or multi-tenant? It is a multi-tenant platform. So we are a multi-tenant cloud provider. So we have to make sure that all of our technologies are multi-tenant. So Zerto is multi-tenant. So in a ransomware scenario, how is the data protected and wouldn't the failover move the infected data? Yes, that is true. What the journal does, though, is allows you to go back in time. So if you know the ransomware attack happened or the infected data happened at, let's see, it's 1:40 p.m. right now. If the attack happened right now, I could go back to 1 p.m. or noon or 11 a.m. Eastern time and be able to go back to that point in time to when the data wasn't infected and be able to recover my applications and get them back up and running. That is the power of that journal, not just a copy data from one site to another and recover. That's more of a backup, snapshot, and recover from backup. That's where you would run into infected data getting into the DR site and recovering from a current backup or current replication. That's that's generally what happens with storage replications, where it's replicating every single bit that comes in. So that's where you would see that failover moving the infected data. Because of the journaling, you're able to go back. Do we offer this where all data resides in Canada? We love our Canadian neighbors to the north. We don't have a data center in Canada, but what we can do is put this on site in your data center. So we have what's called our on-site private cloud. We have a customer right now who has a site in Canada, in Eastern Canada somewhere, I believe. But what ends up happening there is we work with you to put this in your data center where you happen to be the facilities people, but we maintain the platform, we maintain the hosts, and then you have disaster recovery inside of your data centers. So we can do that as well. Referencing the demo, what does the pricing model look like for that type of testing? So you pay per VM. So there is a cost per VM, there's a cost for the resources, and that's it. There is no cost per test. There is no cost for those individual pieces. You don't pay for, this. We don't pay for a test in March and a test in October. You pay for the service, and it's available to you at all times. Is it mandatory to use Zerto for DR? No. We really, really love Zerto because it is the fastest, and it has the lowest RPO of the tools that we have at our disposal. We also recognize that Zerto can be expensive, and that's why we offer what we call our tiered resiliency. It's actually this. So what we do is we offer Zerto for our critical workloads, right? Things that need to be up with near real-time RPO need to be up in minutes. We also offer Cloud Director availability from VMware. It has the same RPO as vSphere replication, which is 5 minutes is the lowest replication you can get to there. The RTO is sub 4 hours, somewhere in there. You can do failovers actually relatively quickly, but we list it as sub 4 hours to make sure that we're not overstating its capabilities, but you don't get the full network failover, and the VPGs are only coming online now as part of 4.0. With Cohesity, you can do that as well. So you can have a Cohesity site, whether that's on-prem in your data center and you're replicating back to us, or in our data center replicating to another one of our data centers. You can bring that up very, very quickly, but the RPO is 4 hours because that's how we do the snapshot. So it is not just one platform or another. Will this work with old versions of Windows or Linux? I'm trying to think about that, because I honestly don't know the full proper answer for that one. I know that it works with all of the currently supported versions of Windows and Linux, but as far as the term old versions can mean old to a lot of different people, right? 2008 is an old version to some people. But in terms of the versions of Windows or versions of Linux, it may depend on the hypervisor support. We support back pretty far, but not like NT4, if that's what you're asking. We recommend Zerto. It is the cleanest, easiest, and has the most features. We really, really like Zerto, but we also offer other workloads or other tiers of resiliency because we recognize that not all workloads are the same, right? Maybe your test dev stuff, low priority stuff, you're fine with just recovering from backups, but you need to have your entire workload available, right? Maybe this is a reporting system that gets used once a month. Maybe it doesn't need to be up in 5 minutes. So those sorts of things. Again, this is us sitting down with you and going through your actual needs and figuring out what you actually need to build for your environment. From a VMware minimal requirements, we maintain the entire platform. So inside of our data centers, you don't have to think about really any of that, right? We put it on our platform and it's maintained. From an on-prem side, I believe that is 6.5 or newer is the last currently supported ESX version. So that's where I would probably stop in terms of support. vCloud or Cloud Director availability can go lower. It can actually go back to, I believe, 5.5. So there are ways for you to do those pieces. But from a network specific standpoint, we do bandwidth into our data center via circuit. You can do it via VPN connection. You can go over the internet. So from our standpoint, it is a matter of being able to do the replication as quickly as possible. But at the same time, once your data has replicated from site A to site B, you're just making journal changes. So the actual amount of network requirement is based on the amount of change that happens in your environment. So for most applications, it's nothing. For database servers, it's probably more. So there's some, kind of ebbs and flows, and it all kind of comes out in the wash in terms of, rates of change. But that's something that would need to be understood. Any other questions? I know I did a lot of talking there. From a tiered resiliency standpoint, these are all individual products. So in terms of what that costs and how that actually lines up would be up to you and our solutions architects and sales teams to figure out where to actually land on what tools or what is best for you. So in terms of, it's not like you get all three of them all together. They're individual pieces. That's a good question, though. I'll think about that. I'll take that back to our team. Any other questions, or else we can give you back some time in your day. From a licensing standpoint, all of this comes through us. So you pay us, and that covers the VM itself, the licensing. I believe OS licensing is included in that as well. So there is a number of, everything is included in there. You don't have to you don't have to go out and find your own licensing and bring it to us. We are a reseller of Zerto or Cloud Director availability or Cohesity. So all of that's taken care of through us. We want to make this as simple as we can for you and your end users. Again, if you want to get your hands on this environment and try this out, reach out to me, aj.kuftik@expedient.com, or go to expedient.com/vmware-test-drive. 30-day free trial, 128 gigs of RAM, terabyte of storage, so you can actually play with this. We've done some other webinars with VMUG, so if you want to sign up for a test drive and run back through all of those and see how we actually do all of the things that we do, things like automation with Terraform and Ansible, see EEC itself and how it can manage and maintain your virtual machines. We can go through all of that as part of the discussion with our solutions architects and make sure that everything is included and this is meeting your needs.
thanks, AJ, so much. Should we wait a little bit more, or do we think this is it?
I'm willing to wait a couple more minutes, but also happy to give people back some time in their day. It's what we do at Expedient. We try to save people time.
That's the expedient way.
See, you get it.
Yeah, I get it. Oh, AJ, I get it. All right, well, with not many more questions coming in, I am going to stop it there if that's okay with you. Well, thank you so much, AJ, for taking the time to speak with us today. As a reminder to our audience, you will receive a follow-up email with the on-demand link from today's webcast. To find out more about the VMUG webcast program, visit vmug.com and check out the education page. Please make sure to complete the short online evaluation that will pop up as you exit the webcast and let us know how today's session went. And from all of us here at VMUG, thank you and have a great rest of your day.